it really is that question where it's like if you ask someone for advice, they give you capital. If you ask them for capital, they give you advice.
Welcome to Fundraising Demystified, the podcast where we uncover the untold stories of successful founders who have raised venture capital to bring their visions to life. Join me, Jason Kirby, your host, as we dive into the hidden truths of the fundraising game. We'll explore different strategies, tactics, lessons learned from these entrepreneurs who have figured out how to win the fundraising game in their own way. Whether you're a budding entrepreneur, just getting started, or an established founder looking to scale your business, this podcast equips you with the knowledge and inspiration to conquer the fundraising landscape.
Welcome to episode 8. Today we have David Daneshgar, the co-founder and CEO at Whippy, an all-in-one communication platform for teams, and they've decided to not raise venture capital and rather bootstrap the business based on their prior experience of raising over $20 million for a company called BloomNation that was backed by A16Z. In this episode, David shares his advice on why he bootstrapped and what it's been like scaling Whippy to over $2 million in ARR. Let's get started.
Hey everyone, this is Jason Kirby again with Thunder.vc and your host of the Fundraising Demystified podcast. Today we have David Daneshgar with us from Whippy.ai, and we're excited to be having you to the show, David.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for having me. Excited to talk about my two stories and any information I can impart on people that are looking to either raise capital or not raise capital. Excited to speak today.
Awesome. No, we're excited to have you, and excited to have you kind of share your story. You have an interesting background, having played professional poker and then gone on to raise venture capital and now starting a bootstrap business. So it'd be great for you to kind of just share your founder journey and kind of what led you to where you are today.
Yeah. Thinking about how far back I can go, but well, I mean, I guess I'll try to be quick here, but yeah, I went to UC Berkeley, and there actually somehow taught a course on poker. At that point, this is right in the heyday of when Chris Moneymaker won, so I'm dating myself. But we taught statistics and probability of gaming, and so that got me super interested. After I went on to be a professional poker player, and ended up winning one of the World Series of Poker events in 2008, and was interested in the business side of stuff, and so became very interested in I actually became friends with the owner of the Lakers. His name is Jerry Buss, and wanted to be a general manager at the Lakers, but ultimately ended up getting his letter of recommendation to go to business school. I went to the University of Chicago, and that's where myself and some of my buddies from college started BloomNation, which started as a marketplace for local florists. Think of like Airbnb for flowers. Teleflor and 1-800-Flowers, they were a broker, so we weren't getting delivered what we thought we were getting, but it ended up becoming back-end software. So the florists actually kind of had their own Shopify, and this is early on. This is probably 10 years ago, where they can make their own websites, their own marketing tools. So that was, and we grew that through a lot of outbound sales. But to start that, and I know that's something you mentioned, one of the first things we did when we got the MVP was go back to play a poker tournament, won a 30K poker tournament. I know a lot of people, it's not as dramatic as it sounds like. We weren't not going to move forward if we didn't, but that did make it easier for us to hire our first outsourced dev team. Was at BloomNation up until a couple years ago and decided to take a little break. And one of the engineers that was there, his name was Jack Kennedy. He also left around the time I was leaving. He actually wanted to stay there and forego finishing his master's. He was at UCLA doing his master's, and came to me, and I said, well, I'm actually just going to take a sabbatical. And so he went back to finish his master's in Ireland, where he was coming from. And then we linked up 2 years ago, and we're really interested in like communication automation. One of the biggest things that I learned at BloomNation, which was obviously, as I mentioned, venture backed, was how big like the addressable market size was, or how important it is to build infrastructure to kind of scale. So we're so focused on local florists, and that's what investors were telling us at the time. You have to be the best in X. But I think at Whippy, we realized that a lot of people needed AI-based communication, or they needed email and SMS automation, or they needed deep integrations with a database or a CRM that they weren't getting from that. So that was harder to focus on. It opened up a lot more doors as we scale. And so As I mentioned, 2 years ago, started Whippy, and now small team. I think we're 13 full time and have never raised any capital. So very different to my story at BloomNation, where I think in total we've raised over 25 million.
Yeah, so you raised 25 million for BloomNation, but for Whippy, you've completely bootstrapped, correct?
Completely. I think, yeah, I mean, I think maybe, and just shows you it's possible. I think maybe in the beginning I issued myself in terms of a loan to the company, but a very small loan. And part of that actually, which pushed me to do that, was that I hadn't exited BloomNation. So I think it's a little bit different. And I know in your own story you've had some exits. I think if you do get this big exit, I think I've learned that sometimes you, not to say you'll start things irresponsibly, but like you're not looking at all the little things that may drive a company because it's not life or death. And here we had to start something else while I still had a lot of equity in another company where I wasn't sitting on a huge amount of like a capital exit. So that made us get crafty. And I think it's really true. Like the saying that people give you, which is you just find ways to do it, even if you can't. And so I think being bootstrapped and also having that experience, I found crafty ways to make sure that like directly or indirectly, every decision you made like had good unit economics. Had because at the end of the day, it's there's nothing else but revenue that drives the company. If that makes sense, there's no other external source of capital.
Yeah, and honestly, that's in fashion these days. I think after the big bubble in venture capital over the last couple of years in 2020, 2021, we're seeing a refocus and a realignment on VCs actually wanting to back more bootstrap businesses, people that had to get scrappy, that were more sustainable, that had actually figured out their unit economics before raising venture capital, so that when they put in $1, they get $3 back or $10, whatever the metrics are. And so I think it's interesting to hear that story. And also, like, probably a lot of founders would think, oh, he probably made so much money on BloomNation and it's so easy for him. But, like, here you are, like, sharing your side of the experience of, like, no, you still had to kind of bootstrap. You still kind of had to make things work, get scrappy. Um, so I'd love for you to kind of share your experience in the from BloomNation in terms of why you raised capital. I believe A16Z was your seed investor,
Mm-hmm.
and then you went on to raise subsequent rounds. So kind of walk us through a little bit about that history and how you guys want to go about raising money, and now all these years later, reflecting back on what you would have done differently.
Yeah, no, that, and I appreciate this podcast. I think sometimes, like you said, you only hear. I don't know how many times I go on LinkedIn, even between ventures when I was starting again. It's hard to start because you see all these success stories, but I do think that little poster where there's this huge iceberg and that little tip on the top where you see the success, how much goes underneath. So I'm hoping some of that would be shed here with your other speakers. In regards to BloomNation, it was a cool, I went to a cool fun story. I went to the University of Chicago, and in the university my two co-founders at the time were playing with this idea of the marketplace, like Teleflor and 1-800-Flowers wasn't servicing them when they were sending to their girlfriends. And so it first of all made my experience at the University of Chicago much better. Um, but when I went on, so just so you know, the first actual round or first amount of capital was the school because the school had their own like business competition backslash minor incubator. And so I think we won the school competition. And that's a great program, by the way, like Grubhub, Braintree, a bunch of big companies have come out of that same University of Chicago, um, University of Chicago program. So that's been a big feeder. We came here and then really quickly we did get actually start doing some fundraising. And I think the main reason why, which is very different, is we had revenue and a lot of customers. Like again, we were hustling and we had, I think at that point, hundreds of florists using us, and some nominal revenue. Now, before that, the story that to get the MVP, none of us were technical. Whippy, my co-founder's technical, has made a huge difference in terms of like balance of responsibilities and being an expert. But we had to go out to an outsourced agency, which created technical debt and problems. But also at the same point in time, like maybe at that point in time versus now, we couldn't get up and running it. Now there's so much no code in all these solutions. So yeah, we got BloomNation up and running. Um, we had some traction going. We had floors that were signing up. And then I think, yeah, it was Chris Dixon, actually, who was a seed investor, who wasn't at Andreessen Horowitz yet, who had then moved over, who brought us and introduced us to Jeff Jordan, we became very good friends with an investor in Andrew Parker, who I think at the time was at Spark Capital. Um, and then Mucker Labs. We decided to go through the incubator Mucker, and they invest in us as well, and they've been very successful. And so that's how we kind of raised that capital. We raised a 1.5 seed at the time, and then a $5.5 million round about a year and a half later, where Ronnie Conway Jr. came in. And so that was all good. I mean, to be honest, it was really fun, and all the stuff that you say makes the whole process a little more sexy. I think where it turned was when we realized that we were kind of like in today's world, where we realized we were running out of runway and we actually had to have a recap. So that's a very different process than some of the things that people experience now, which maybe no one experienced back then. It was in 2016 where there was this one period of time where it was a little bit difficult to get fundraising. And I remember going into like a board meeting or a visit, and we're like, oh, by the way, we have X amount of runway. And the investor there was like, what the hell? You know what I mean? And so we went through that experience, which happy to talk about. I don't know if people here know about a recap, but essentially we had to go to our current investors and be like, this is a situation, we are a good business, but like cash flow wise, there's going to be an issue. And I think it's kind of like called like pay to play, where the investors either have to follow on or forfeit some of their ownership. So that was also a little bit of a messy time, and it did give at least myself and some of my co-founders and stuff, I would say, a little bit more of a heart of steel, because we had to go through that heart attack, where I think that's what's happening to people now, if I'm not mistaken. They're going through those type of recaps. So we went through that in 2016. So I think that did forge some of the mentality that I now have on like never wanting to go back there again.
I think it's you hit it on the nail. That's what a lot of, I would say, like series people that were expecting a quick Series B after raising a frothy Series A were in for, and even like Series C, like we're in for a rude awakening and having to deal with recaps, because it just, everyone thought the money train would keep coming, and everyone told them to burn all, like, at all costs, grow at all cost, and now it just, VCs changed their mind and they're like, no, we don't want that anymore. We want profitability, sustainability, unit economics, like important things to have, but it just wasn't the part of the conversation.
I think ours was a unique company too, by the way. Sorry to interrupt you, but like we were actually doing good revenue then. So I don't think we've ever, from historically from BloomNation, and I think that has to do with the addressable market size, gotten like a really good multiple. Like whenever we were raising money, like we were also producing revenue. But you're right. What ended up happening is our expenses were higher than revenue. So the recap actually made us think, okay, like how in in 2 months does our revenue stay here, but our expenses go here, and therefore we are like carrying our head over water. But we were today when I see a lot of companies, it's pretty strange because they go through a recap, but like there was no plan, there was no necessary revenue. Does that make sense? And here the recap to me was almost like a float, because we just need to adjust some things, and we were, not to say we were fine, but we had that luxury that I think other companies didn't, because at BloomNation's principle, it was built the right way. It was built with that in mind, and so there was a huge dimension. I mean, if we had like something like Pipe or some type of like forward year subscription software now, we would probably have been okay. But it was a result of that and just timing.
Yeah, revenue based financing is one of the amazing. There's a lot of debt solutions right now that have become very popular to kind of, if you were smart in this market, to kind of manage and generate revenue, and you just really need some time to get to break even. Like, it's a great kind of stopgap. And yeah, it'd be great to kind of share, and hear from your side of just kind of like what happened after that recap, because as far as it looks like BloomNation is still actively running, and hasn't been acquired or hasn't been a exit. So what was your kind of, what happened after that recap, and then what's kind of been your exit journey out of your role there?
Yeah, so I mean, I think everything was great before that, but I think the recap was actually a good thing because it made us act more like an internal private equity company, right? Like we sat in our own, like, and that was cool. Like especially for myself, my other co-founder, the one that was a CFO was more prepared for this. But I think for us, it made us understand like how to look at a P&L, and like I said, like how do we actually, like, let's say we're buying this as an equity or an asset now, like how would we restructure this? So that was really cool because I didn't pay attention to those classes in business school. So the real world actually prepared me much quicker. Um, I mean, in our time, it was a little bit messy in the sense that like everyone kind of had to take down a certain amount of equity, and the new stakeholders got it. probably I would call like a deal. And then what happened is everyone that was currently at the company had to like they would actually reclassify you shares to kind of get back to where you were. So as a founder, one of the things that kind of sucked is you know how you actually have this, I don't know, it's called qualified small business stock, but you basically you go and you file when you file a C corp, you file a 83B election. I don't exactly know if
Yeah.
that's it, but like
Yeah,
you
it's
get
for
5 years.
QSPS.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
get 5 years, right? That was one of the things. I'm Persian, so we don't like to pay taxes. So that was one of the things I would tell my parents. They were very excited. But like things like that meant that we had to actually redo that. Like we had to get ourselves to back, reissue stock to ourselves because we got watered down and we had to earn it back out for a lot of the former employees, not the current employees or former shareholders that couldn't play to pay or early investors. A lot of them lost a lot of the equity. So that kind of obviously sucked as a founder. Where did we go from there? I think we got very fiscally responsible. BloomNation is humming now. I mean, I know they raised. I left in the start of 2020, and I think in 2020, 2021, they did raise another round because there was a huge shift, right, where people were starting to go more online, and so all these e-commerce platforms saw a boom. Um, I don't know exactly where they are now, but the company, I think when I left, it was like 60, and I think went up to 120, and I think heading back down maybe to 80 or 90 as people get more fiscally responsible. I know they've tried to double down on some of the stuff I touched on earlier, which was how do we increase our addressable market size? So I think they're trying to become a platform for the liquor shop, the butcher, whoever uses other platforms. Like they're looking at fragmented the carpet cleaner. I don't exactly know, but yeah, I mean the company is still there, and I'm still an equity holder in it. I think when I thought back when I left, and like the traditional, again, this is a great podcast. It's not always what the movie says. I thought, okay, I'm going to leave, and here's my big check, and on to the next. But I think that would have also done a disservice because I don't think I would have been as snappy or as an operator. Most people that run through that just can't get into the grind again. And I was hitting the cold calls again. Why? Because I had to. But I think that created a culture for us now at Whippy, which um, is is kind of the way, like it's like someone who plays football, or and you have a chip on your shoulder. You really haven't won the Super Bowl. You've gotten close, and maybe that will happen. And so I think that did create a drive in us. And yeah, the company's going well. There's actually some crossover. Some of my old customers that are florists actually use my new platform, but it's totally been where I was all in or not. And I was on the board for a little while and then gave up my board seat. And I think that opened a new door where in the beginning, myself and Jack, it was just like trying to figure out, product market fit and testing things out and seeing what people wanted and who would pay for contracts before a software's out and that type of stuff. But yeah, I mean, that was a little bit of my experience there, and happy to share anything else if you have any other questions.
No, I think that's an amazing story, especially because the ups and downs you went through with Bloom Nation, and then basically electing to start over again, even though like Bloom Nation is stable and growing and humming. You kind of chose to start over because it was the right decision for you, and you didn't get a big payday. Now, hopefully, maybe down the road or however things work out, that happens for you. There's secondary options down the road, but
Yeah, I'm cheering for them, that's for sure. But I'm also
yeah.
cheering. I'm cheering also for myself, and I think that's one thing I can answer for other people that are even founders. I kind of think of like poker because I know we can talk about that too. But I played professional poker at one point, been like this is way back 2006, 2007, one of the top hold'em tournament players. I think you need a couple horses in the race. And I think if one's going well, but you also don't think personally maybe you add as much value as you can, or you may want to go somewhere else, like it's also good because that's going well, this is going well, and you want a bunch of, I mean, not to gamify it, but a bunch of horses in the race. You want to have different options or outcomes. And I think that's kind of what we're doing here with Whippy. We did see some things, at least me personally, whether it's from fundraising, whether it's on the addressable market, whether it's the customer base, that I wanted to kind of, how would I say that? Take those learnings and kind of try it. Like, I mean, classic things to like when you're a SaaS company, you have an account management. You don't want to scale linearly with customer service, right? So we're kind of used to X amount of accounts, add another person, and we want to know how to, whether it's automate or documentation or certain things that like, even you could even outsource some of that. And so I think there were things like that around the fundraising, and mainly we'll talk about around bootstrapping and having your own destiny be your own decision, which were some of the things that I was intrigued in trying in my premise with Jack for the next company was we just wanted something that could touch so many clients if it worked out. And that was hard because it was so broad that it's the opposite of what venture companies would tell you to do, which is like focus, focus, focus on being the best in one thing in one vertical.
Yeah, I saw that on your website. You kind of list a couple different verticals. You have a whole separate pitch for, whether it's insurance companies or real estate agents or whatever it might be, and kind of tailoring your message across each vertical, but giving your tech can technically be applicable to multiple verticals. It's just a matter of positioning and making sure that that particular customer persona recognizes the value. Again, like, yeah, VCs typically want you to be perfect and down one lane, but the beauty of bootstrapping is you get to make the right decision for your business and the way you want to run it. And you don't necessarily have to worry about the venture capital game as much. And if it works for you, then you may already have like VCs throwing like, hey, do you want to chat? If you figure it out and you kind of get off to the races. Um, so I guess give us a little bit more context on Whippy and kind of what stage you guys are at and kind of how you've kind of structured your team and what would be well I'll ask some more questions later. I don't want to stack questions on you.
No, no, it's all good. So, I mean, I can get more into BloomNation, but when I left, it's somewhere around 100 people. My actual title there was more of a CRO. Here is a CEO. I didn't even know what a CRO is. I probably still don't. But what mainly I was responsible for is revenue, like getting it and keeping it and scaling it. So, and I like I always hear these things now about are you sales led, product led, and I think they kind of intersect. But I was someone who enjoyed the prospecting or hunting. So with Whippy, I mean, I think I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but you know, I would almost say that we acted as a tech consultant or something. So what happened is there was like a personal injury lawyer, and like, hey, what's your problem? And basically all of these could be solved in text or email. But like, oh, I get these leads that come on, Facebook, and they fill out a form for an ad, and my team takes too long to get to them and qualify them. Cool. Oh, I have a bunch of clients and I want to know if they're going to leave me for another attorney. Okay, cool. We could send out this messaging via a mass message. Oh, if they ever say the word Uber, I want to automatically assign it to my key salesperson because that's a huge case. And so you need some automation or AI for question and answers. It's very functional. Then staffing companies started using us, and they need to send jobs to thousands. And one of the things that we started building was the backend software on message. I would say delivery and throughput. A lot of the SMS providers, like we would look up the phone carrier of the recipient, and there's something called a brand score, which is like, hey, you're failing AT&T. We're only going to give you this much amount of messages, and we could basically throttle it based on these kind of more complex formulas so that they could get more deliverability when they were sending out jobs and stuff like that. So there was some of that as well. But it really kind of started as an SMS platform, and then we started realizing like, oh, they need to automate these workflows. And so they use Zapier and certain stuff. So, hey, if we could build automations inside ours. So, hey, if you ask someone, how was your experience 1 through 5 on your job yesterday? And they say a 5, automatically send them a Google review link. If they don't open the Google review link and we detect that, automatically send it again. And since they gave us a good score, 3 and 10 days later, ask them for a referral. That's what those companies were having people do. And we realized, hey, if we do a lot of that automatically and then surface up things to people, wow, would that be more efficient? So I kind of call it like functional AI. And so those different use cases you're saying, those are us just getting paired up with someone where someone tells someone or we go out there and send out cold emails and someone's like I'm a compound pharmacy. And what I need, my problem is to increase my refills and reminders and stuff like that. And my CRM doesn't do that. And that's where we'll bring in like a product expert in Whippy who does two things. They're almost like an entrepreneur, CEO in residence at Whippy. They'll look at like what are the needs and what's the market size. Like, oh, and they'll make a pitch internally. If we build 1, 2, and 3, we could get this many pharmacies that use this many CRMs. What ends up happening, I would almost call it Notion like, is we just create blocks. Like there's automations, there's campaigns, there's these different things, but then people can actually kind of customize it themselves, where partnerships has become a big thing. Like even marketing agencies that want to use our software or our API to enhance their own, let's say, software stack because they don't want to build a lot of this. So Whippy is a communication platform focused on SMS, adding email, down the road voice. that utilizes a lot of automation and AI, and it's being used to fill a lot of the gaps that maybe their CRM or their current workflows aren't doing. And again, just to double down on how important that is, we would go out to people and figure out how much will they pay? Will they forward us that money if we build this? Do you know what I mean? So we almost acted like a tech agency in the beginning just because we were bootstrapped, which actually means you can't take fluff. You can't take someone who's like, oh, I will pay you this, which is what you hear a lot of startups doing and what investors may say. Like in the bootstrap world versus the other world, like money is the lifeblood of it. So you have to actually do your best to pitch something that they'll pay for in advance, right? And then you just have to justify to yourself, are there thousands of others people that would utilize that?
Yeah, you say something so magical there. Like, I was just talking to a founder, and they were so set on like giving away their service for free to get a logo. Like get a brand that says they're going to use their service. When they start charging, and they're trying to basically use VC money to subsidize customer acquisition, and that just doesn't float anymore. VCs kind of see through that and recognize like if you can't convince them to pay you, then you probably shouldn't exist. And so I think it's smart of you to just going to go in there and it's like there's no BS. You're going after customers that are actually paying you for the value that you're delivering, and it's not like trying to manufacture or fabricate a story that will convince an investor to give you money to then build a product that maybe the customer will use. You're kind of going straight in for that customer value proposition right away, and listening to your customers. Putting yourself out there and kind of seeing what comes in, and albeit it can sometimes, it depends on the business. Like your tech seems pretty scalable across initiative, different industries, but I think that's something that founders really need to kind of analyze and think about of, how are they going to market and getting those kind of first customers, and do they even need to raise money if they get, if you're charging the right amount and you're maximizing the value. Because also, I went to your website and, I've seen a lot of kind of chat solutions and, marketing solutions, and they usually start off like pretty inexpensive and it's per user model. And I think you guys are kind of like in the, mid range and a couple $100 a month. And it's probably because you have like you're replacing a human in some cases, or augmenting a
Yeah,
human.
I would say it's pretty wide. I mean, you don't see it there. There are people that pay us 10 or 20 grand a month. So, but there are people that pay us, 99 a month. It is, and that's another thing I would just tell you. We focus with the potential to make this more enterprise ready. So not just doing things like HIPAA and SOC 2 and those type of things, but how do you support multiple users in multiple locations and multiple products that we can replace? How do you build some custom things for larger clients that can open the door for others, whether it's like an integration or an adjustment to the product? But no, I think I would say that like, on the SMB side, like if you think of some of the flower shops I used to work with, they'll use it for something and be at the lower price. But then we'll get to a large firm that needs it for multiple locations and like to replace certain workflows, as you said, that people are manually doing, and you want to build something where, and that's a big thing. Like I want to continue to build where you can get 100K, 1 million. I mean, whatever you can go ARR contracts. But yeah, I mean that's been huge because we went to market, I would say last year. So what is it, 2022? And yeah, it's helped a lot. Like for us, we have, I mean, you can do the math, but we're a profitable company. We have 12 full-time people. Um, um, we have a bunch of contractors, and we maintain to be profitable. But what I will tell you is like we would go and like if it was like 100K contract or a 50K or 20K contract, the first thing me and my partner would say is like, oh, that will enable us to get this type of candidate. So it was revenue that would get us to like it's like blackjack, double down on the company, which is really good because when you talk about exits and exit directions, for BloomNation, if you raise a certain amount of whether it's debt-based, revenue-based financing or raise capital, you have people on your cap table that have certain rights and can kind of gear you to the direction. They need to return something to their LPs, right? So here it's like if we see the momentum going, we can just keep doubling down and make our own version of I don't want a good story of a like a Zapier or something where people are able to kind of like their only money their rate is on secondaries. If you decide to be like a 5-10 million hour company, right? And like that's good cash flow for you, that's still a solid world if you want to and a nice exit. So but I think you just kind of leave those options open. I don't want to sit here and profess like I know exactly where it's going as you said. That was a story we had to pitch to investors. I think right now we're enjoying the journey and like really jiving well with our customers. We just got back from a trip from Dallas where we did take one of the old playbooks I had at BloomNation and throw an event in a city, bring our customers in there, invite new customers, right? Like what better cold call is there to be like, hey, we're having an event at a pizza place and your competitors are coming. Can you come? Great. You're going to be interested. Can you not come? Well, this is a good reason to get on the demo. So a lot of that, we still are maintaining some of that localized sales strategies and B2B strategies. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of where we're at now with Whippy.
So yeah, and I think really, and I've talked to a lot of bootstrap founders that get to millions of dollars in revenue, and just by recognizing how to connect and better sell their customers, and really putting all their effort on that as opposed to raising capital. And like, and here I am, like I specialize in helping founders raise venture capital, but like, you know, trust me, if you don't need it, don't get it. It's like one of the things I try to encourage founders to recognize. If you don't need venture capital, find a way to not need venture capital, and ironically, the venture capital will come to you. I could very much see VCs reaching out to you and being like, "Oh, would you be interested in having a chat?
Yeah, for
Coffee." Like
sure.
as you kind of continue to scale Whippy.
So I think one of your questions that you messaged me before, I don't remember which one, but advice or like how to raise capital. What I learned, um, it really is that question where it's like if you ask someone for advice, they give you capital. If you ask them for capital, they give you advice. So I think that is actually a really true saying, and I think it's almost like, I mean, anything in dating, right? If you're too aggressive or whatever, people are like, oh, and if you're not and you're friending someone, someone's like, why aren't they asking me out? Are they not interested? So I think that same psychology, I mean, probably 10x it for the venture crowd, and I think you'll probably get like what that formula looks like. But I think you're right. I mean, we ourselves, just crossed where we just started and then now about just crossing around 2 million in ARR. And for us, if you look back like a year and a half ago, the truth is I would have told you that's only possible if we raise money. I think now actually it's really interesting when you do the math and like you grow and you have that type of cash flow. It's almost like you raised a $4 or $5 million um, Series A or seed. You have those logos, but I do think that by forcing yourself to kind of do that, you'll tell yourself if this is real or not. And one thing I can impart on the listeners here is is the worst thing to do is be in a gray place. I mean, it's always good to find out like, is this viable or not as soon as possible? Because we only have one life to live. You know what I mean? And so like, if this isn't it, I know so many people that start 10 companies. It was the 11th or the 5th. But the thing to do is convince yourself that it is when it's not. And your best friends, it's hard for them to tell you, but your customers will. People that pay money, they pay for opinions with green cash. So I think that is something that is at some point something that people don't want to do because they may not want to get the truth or they're not ready for it.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree. Founders, myself included, like pivoting because not getting that signal from customers of like yes and like oh yes please take my money and more. And if you're not getting that signal, like clearly it's not hitting product market fit. But I still see founders like that are able to raise despite and trying to throw money at the problem when they haven't even found the real problem they're trying to solve. And one of my close friends out here in New York, he's I think he was on his ninth pivot with him and his co-founder, like over the last 2.5 years, like just nothing but pivoting. They only raised I think $250,000 for one of their ideas, and or maybe $500,000 or something like that. They kept at it in their most recent business in the AI space because they were like trend hopping, and they just hit $500,000 a month in MRR in like 6 months. Just went from like $0 in monetization to $500,000 a month, and you're just like, all right, that's product market fit. You're good to go. And they had term sheets flying at them before they even really went to market. And it just goes to show like listening to customers and kind of listening and being willing to kind of pivot and kind of make the decisions that lead you to customer satisfaction and revenue, as opposed to kind of giving things away for free and subsidizing it with outside capital. So appreciate you bringing up that point. And so one thing we didn't talk too much about that I think would be fun is to kind of tap in a little bit more in terms of what you leverage from your poker experience. I know it was years ago when you were active. I'm not sure if you're still playing in any capacity, but what are some of the lessons that you've leveraged, or skills that you leverage from your poker history to kind of build your company, raise capital, and get to where you are?
Yeah, I mean, no, that's a good question. Hmm. I mean, I think one thing about poker I always tell you that I've learned in business, first of all, so poker is a little bit like a timed game. You can't sit there and think forever, and you have to have a lot of muscle memory. Like I've seen this before, but you have to decide quick. And I think that's kind of indicative of what I've seen founders be successful, which is like, and something that I'm always working on myself, which is like quick decision making. I think one of the things I think for myself, to some capacity, as BloomNation grew, but also at much bigger companies, there becomes this level of, I don't want to say bureaucracy because that may be something, but like you get in meetings. I think what you're seeing now, people are letting go of a lot of, what do you call it, like middle managers, because there's meetings on meetings on meetings. I think there's so much to be said about something that just makes a decision, and then even if it fails, they move quick. That would be like poker versus a meeting. Like you can't go to a poker and say timeout and like here's a meeting and timeout guys. This is the meeting about this hand and like I'm back in. You have to decide quick and live and die with it. And a lot of times you're wrong. But I think that's been helpful. My partner Jack's done a fabulous job of that as well on the technical side of stuff. So I think that's one part. Um, that's pretty helpful. I think another one that I'm currently working on as well, but it's like tilt. I think to a certain capacity in poker. I don't know if you play poker yourself, Jason. Do you?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's been a while, but I was pretty active back in 2006 as well. Nothing to
Okay,
the
good.
skill that of you, but I was
Yeah.
playing online, playing with friends all the time.
I mean, we see it in business, especially if we're going to bootstrap something. There's going to be a lot of volatility, and it's a good example of bootstrapping because you're a bankroll. So poker players go under a lot of stress because they have a certain amount of bankroll, and if they're out, they're out. They have to go back to getting a real job. So I think in that world, like if something knocks you off your feet in poker, the best players, when you think of the Phil Ivies of the world, they're like very even keeled. Like they're somehow able to like get through that. And I've seen that with a lot of founders too, especially when you have other people on your team. Because it's like if you don't do that and they start to see you kind of shy away or lose confidence, or believe me, there are mornings I wake up, I'm like, oh shit, what am I going to do today? How am I going to solve this? But I think that's something that like the founders may have to harness, and you need to make sure you kind of lead by example. And so I think that ability to not get on to tilt, as we said in poker, is something that's pretty viable from the poker world as well, as I mentioned. And yeah, I mean, I think if I mean, there's that whole cliche about reading people. There was an example even in BloomNation that we raised an extra $1 million from just like making a read off someone and saying, "Hey, this is our last and final." I think here, whether it's negotiation or people, um, I do think there's a certain capacity to reading people, but I do think in the end, just like the execution and the variance, those are things that go really well with founders.
Yeah, no, I think that's a valuable way to look at it. I think everyone's kind of looking for that, like how do you read people and kind of read situations, but your kind of quick decision making and kind of sticking with that decision, I think is something that as a founder, like you just can't like. I think some of the worst founders I've run into, or not, I don't want to say worst, but like where they struggle the most is you know paralysis by analysis, and that's kind of what you're eliminating with your background and your experience is not kind of falling into that trap where you kind of just make the decision, make it quick, and take it to the decide another decision point where it's either worked or hasn't worked. So I appreciate you sharing that insight. And from, I guess from here, kind of where do you see the future of Whippy? Kind of what's next for you in this journey? Do you ever foresee yourself ever considering venture capital? Or are you going to kind of stay the course, keep it bootstrap?
I think stay the course. I mean, this may motivate other founders, but the next round I want to raise is a secondary round. Like I don't want my in our world, especially we've done something again. I maybe put myself in this situation as well, but like as you want to have a family or you want to buy a house or stuff like that, like I'm not under the illusion of like, hey, let me raise and let me do this and in 10 years. Like I actually have a lot of respect. I mean, obviously for that path, but also for like what our parents did or people that had to like you know drive stuff now. So I think I'll stay down that path. I'm very excited about the product, my partner, and the team. I think we've done a really good job of creating a core team that I would take against anyone anywhere. Like I think that's been culturally a big thing, and they've all kind of subscribed to where we're going. We're adding other product suites. I mentioned email, voice, going into other industries. We just launched an API, so for a lot of these other systems that don't want to build off Twilio, or just like there's a lot of dev resources to build some of that, they can build off our platform as well. Um, I think that, and just, I mean, honestly, just maintain a high level of profitability, and you know, I think focus on being a good company, but also I think focus on making uh, the right decisions and making money. I mean, I think as someone, and I'm sure some of the people on this podcast may listen to, and I think you mentioned it, there's a right time and there's, if I had a company that needed a certain amount of capital unlock and I had proof points there, but I just couldn't get to it without that, like I don't know if I'm building hardware or software, I'm not sure. Like those are things that are needed. Or if there's a real race with a incumbent and it's like a market grab, winner take all type thing. But I think for most businesses, I think you said it well. If they start on this path, what's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to make the right decisions. If anything, investors are going to come knock on their door and they can have that decision. But here's the key thing: they can dictate the terms, not the investor. When we had conversations before, and you're going out to people, the power is in their hands. And here, if we do this correctly, and that door did ever open, it would be more that we were the ones that would be dictating those terms. Because if not, we were fine the way we were. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I find that that's going to be, I think, our probably next 2 years of venture. The companies that are getting funded are the ones that are more positioned like yourselves, and those are the ones that we're taking on as clients, are the ones that are hitting a point of profitability or break even, have solid unit economics, because you know the math equation changes now for venture. It's, of course, they want their 100x return, but they also want to see a clear path to, like, I give you $1, you turn that into $10. Like, they want to
Yeah.
see the equation, and it's a much easier equation to build if you've already gone to market, have customers, have profitable business.
I think
Um,
I'll
but
throw a curveball in here.
okay,
I'll throw a curveball for you guys.
I'm ready.
I think one path that actually doesn't get spoken a lot, especially early venture, is strategic investment. Like there was a situation, or there will be, where they're like big companies using our platform or CRM companies using our platform. That to me could make sense, especially in like a secondary world where it's a win-win, where you don't only get money, but you're locking up contracts. Do you know what I mean?
No, I think that is something that is often overlooked, and I think a lot of founders are scared because, like, oh, I'm going to give up my IP. I have to show them what I'm doing, and they kind of get caught up into not wanting to share and afraid of competition. But in reality, it's like, if it's that easy to steal,
Hmm.
you're probably not doing it right. And that's something I always kind of rest on, was like, you should be able to present to competitors, or to not competitor, like strategics, and feel confident that you built a product or a solution that is not easily replicable, and that would be worth having. And if that's the case, like, you're again setting yourself up for success to, like in your situation, like, lock down a strategic, both as an equity partner to potentially help you scale, or bring you, basically be a customer. So they're bringing revenue and cash, which could be a win-win across the board. And as you described, more of a secondary, so it's cash in your pocket, not necessarily to the business. So it's a nice little win for you. Um, but David, it's been amazing having you on the show. Where can our listeners find you, or follow you, or learn more about Whippy?
I think if I mean, they can go to LinkedIn. They can go to Instagram. They can go to Twitter. It's either under Whippy or Whippy AI, or you can check out our website. There's contact information there as well. I definitely think if there's someone listening and and they think of a use case for them, or a company or portfolio company that is, you can also you can email us at info at Whippy, WHIPPY.co, or info at HelloWhippy.com, HELLOWHIPPY.com, or find us on any of these social measures. And happy to, if there are other people that have questions about they're going down that path. Always, I think this is a great conversation. As you pointed when we start, it's just, I do really like to myself listen to some of these podcasts that do kind of show other sides of the story. And yeah, love to, if anyone has any questions, they can feel free to reach out to me direct.
Oh, awesome, appreciate that. We'll make sure to include those links in the show notes for people to learn more and to reach out. But any final parting words that you would like to share with the audience before we part ways?
No, I mean, I think that this was a super, basically two side in terms of the conversation. I think the main thing is there's not a right way to do anything. I think based on the company, based on the tailwinds, based on the industry, I mean, I think that's the key thing. I would just keep an open mind for both and really try to figure out, but I would force yourself in the beginning, and especially for the next couple years, it sounds like, to do this because I feel like it's harder in the beginning. It's harder in the beginning, but once you do, a lot more doors or a lot more control becomes available to yourself as a founder.
No, I agree, especially in that bootstrap versus VC world decision. But David, it's been an absolute pleasure having you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, and we look forward to sharing your story to our audience.
Thank you.